Okay, welcome. Here we're back to Tom Ryan Remembers after a long hiatus. Today is November 20th, the anniversary of the death of Franco and the birthday of Kit Treadwell, as well as being a very warm day today in Tokyo. The low temperature was about 75, and it's supposed to get up to a little bit over 80 today. In
Wow.
November. It's called global warming, I guess. But
Yeah, we made 70 today in Loveland, Colorado.
today and 70 already. Yeah. So wow, that's great.
Very nice day.
Tom's here, and the topic today is Marilyn, the early years. And so we're going to talk to actually take Marilyn's life in two or three different sections. And the first one here is the early years. So I guess what we do is start out with, gosh, where was she born? Where and when?
That's a good question. It happens that she and I were born in the same hospital by the same doctor, only she was born 3 years uh, after I was. So she was 3 years younger than I. Her, Marilyn June Halteman started her life at St. Therese Hospital at the end of the bus line at the west end of Washington Street uh, in Waukegan, Illinois. And she was born there and delivered by the same doctor that delivered me in 1930. And we eventually got married, but this is way before. And I didn't even know Marilyn June Halteman back then, but she lived on Bluff Street in Waukegan, Illinois, and that's where she went from the hospital to home. Her father, C.J. Haldeman, Clarence J. Haldeman, often called C.J. or just Pops, he he did a lot of different things. He was a science teacher in high school, but that didn't work out, and he dropped out of that even before Marilyn was born. And he started a photographic business. He would go to drugstores and grocery stores and pick up Kodak film that had come out of their people's cameras, and he would take it to his house and put it through a machine that would develop the film, and then he would make prints of those pictures and then dry them on a drum, and these were hard photographs, and they were quite the thing in that day. And so then people would pick them up at the drugstore and pay for them. So he didn't have to deliver them right to their house. But he had a route. He would go to different grocery stores and drugstores and pick up these films. It was a lot of work, and he used chemicals. And they down in the basement of the Bluff house, the whole family got involved in developing these films. And
Yikes.
Marilyn, when she remembers when she was like 3 years old, she would go down there and they had chemicals in tubs, and they would run these films through the chemicals, and the chemical would develop the film. It would make the negative suitable for making a positive picture. And she would say, if she would count them, eeny, meeny, miny, mo, here's another one to go, or something like that. She had a little song she would sing as she would develop these films. So the whole family got involved in the business. And I don't know what, down in the basement with all those chemicals, that
Yeah,
doesn't sound
those
very
chemicals
healthy.
are very caustic.
Plastic,
Yeah,
right? And there was her mother was a nurse eventually, and she was a nurse, and then her brother was a nurse, and so her brother always had wondered if the diseases the family had were connected to that film developing. At any rate, that's what they did on Bluff Street.
now
Bluff
Bluff
Street,
Street, I'm sorry, Bluff Street, is that on top of a
it's
bluff?
on Bluff, that's
Yeah.
right.
And
sometimes names don't really describe this, but this really was on a bluff. And the ravine that ran through Waukegan was down below, and it was, much of it was a park throughout the town, city park, and parts of it were just nobody owned, and we kids would play in those ravines. And Bluff Street was right near downtown, where the ravine emptied into Lake Michigan. So she went to her first school, though, was not, they moved. The reason Poppy would buy houses, it was the Depression, 1933, when she was born. And a lot of people were losing their houses because they couldn't pay the mortgage, they lost their jobs, and they couldn't make the mortgage payments. So Pop would go around, very enterprising, and he'd pick up these distressed properties that the bank owned now, and he would get them at a bargain, and then he would rent them out, and then eventually he sold them at quite a profit because, of course, after the Depression was over, World War II, and this was all, we grew up during the Depression and World War II, and these houses increased in value, and he sold them one at a time to finance his retirement because he didn't have any pension except for Social Security, which was passed about this time. And so they had another house on Bluff Street, and then they went over to a newer house, a nicer house on the north side, which was the fancy side of Waukegan. And they lived in this great big kind of a mansion, but it was old and it had been not taken very good care of. So his idea was to live in it and repair it and remodel it, and then they eventually would sell it. So she lived in a second house on Gillette.
I remember that, when he still had that when he died.
That's right. He lived in there when he died, and alone, and it was a mess. But
I remember trying to clean up the attic, and it was just full of shit. I mean, lots of everything, just pack rat. Yeah.
A pack rat, and he rented it out to Navy people because these Navy people their wives would come to town and didn't have any. They wanted to be near their sailor husbands, and the government didn't provide any housing for that. So they had to find a place, and he would rent out rooms in their place to Navy people. And as time went on, and CJ and Virginia Bishop, who he married and had 3 children with, that Virginia and Clarence got divorced. And during that time was when they lived on Gillette. And Gillette originally had elm trees growing up and down the street, big elm trees like 200 feet high, and they would meet at the top, and they were on the side of the road. And so it was like an archway. It was beautiful. And then the Dutch elm disease came along in the 1940s, and every one of those elm trees had to be cut down. They all died. So it was a beautiful place when Marilyn lived there. She got scarlet fever, and scarlet fever there wasn't any vaccine for it, and it was it could do heart damage and leave you with serious heart damage.
About how old was she when she got scarlet fever?
8 years old, I think.
Yeah.
And she was quarantined. That's the only thing they knew to stop the spread of it. So she was quarantined. That meant that nobody could go into the house, and the local health department came out and nailed a sign to the front of the house: no entry, danger, scarlet fever in here. And so she and her mother stayed in the house, and the boys, two older brothers, Marilyn Dillard Halteman and Conrad Joseph Halteman, they went to live with their father, and they found one of his houses they lived in until until she got over the quarantine. And they used to bring food they'd go to the grocery store and get food and bring it to the house until that. And they'd put it on the porch. And then Virginia and little Marilyn would come out on the porch and peek out the door and wave to them. And they'd stay on the sidewalk and wave back. And then that was their only contact. And she
Wow.
remembered how terrible that was to be quarantined.
Well, that's what,
she survived.
yeah.
Like most kids survived the scarlet fever.
Well, that's what,
after a short time.
that's what Maki is doing now with her mother, who lives in the old folks home just down the road. She goes down there almost every day and then, waves to her mother and maybe brings some food or something like that. But it's, they're still not allowed to have contact. Just recently.
We have an assisted living here in Loveland, Colorado, and where we live, it's part of a continuing care community. And yesterday I saw a man who was a patient in the assisted living, and he came down and looked through a window and sat in a chair. And three of his relatives were outside the window, sitting in chairs, and they were waving at one another.
Right.
That's very sad. You can't even touch, or
Right.
it might spread the disease.
But
so we're
anyway,
in a pandemic now.
Back to Mom.
Back to her and what she was doing. So she did pretty well in school and went to school there. And during the these sailors that lived there, after her mother and her father got divorced, she'd be left with these sailor wives who would take care of her. And so she was just kind of passed from one to the other. And she was just a little kid. And
because her mother, Virginia, was working full time, right?
Yeah, she had to go to work. And she worked at the Victory Memorial Hospital, which was just down the block. But, she couldn't live there with Clarence anymore. So she was living in an apartment with a friend. And one of the doctors at the hospital found out that she was just working at a very low paying nurse assistant job. And he said, and you were in the nurses training in Philadelphia and at University of
Pennsylvania. Yeah.
And you were nurses training. And then she got married. And of course, they kicked her out of nurses training. You couldn't be married and be in nurses training then. And because most of them either were pregnant or were going to be pregnant, and she got married to Clarence. So that's why she quit nurses training and never finished. He said, oh, you should go back. There's a cadet corps. They started because there's a nurse shortage, and the government will give you a scholarship and pay for your tuition, and you can finish. And it's a rapid fist, and you only have to take it for 2 years instead of 3. And you'll be a registered nurse, and then you will make enough to support you and Marilyn. And so that's what she did. She went off to Chicago and left her kids in the care of CJ. And so that was kind of a sad thing. And Marilyn didn't really understand all that was going on.
So this is when Marilyn was maybe 10 or 12 years old, something like that.
Yeah, right. Yeah. So because it was during World War II, which started in 1941, and that's it. The divorce took place right then, and her older brother went off and joined the Navy. He was 17 years old at the time. He had to lie about his age, and they would only take you if you're 18.
Yeah. Okay. I think this is we're getting into the second episode here with brothers and things, but yeah. So they moved away, but eventually, let's see. They ended up somewhere down south in Tuscaloosa, Alabama.
Oh yeah, much later after her mother graduated and got a nursing degree. then she could get a job as a registered nurse, and she was able to make enough money. And Pop, they got a divorce, and they gave he in the settlement. He didn't have any money. He had everything invested in these houses, so he gave her a house. That was her share of the property, and the house happened to be next on 1519 Cornelia Avenue, and we were at 1515 Cornelia Avenue where I lived. And so Marilyn came there, and she was just a high school student then. And I was in college. I was ready to graduate at college, and she was just starting high school. And she had a boyfriend even then, and I would see her and the boyfriend and their friends, but I didn't really know her. I didn't get to know her until she went away with her mother to Tuscaloosa, Alabama. And the reason they went was because her mother could get a promotion and be the chief nurse maybe at the Downey Veterans Hospital if she were to go away. They thought you couldn't graduate from regular nurse into chief nurse and at the same hospital. You had to go away and prove yourself in another hospital, and then you could come back. So she agreed to do that. And Marilyn was pulled out of Waukegan High School. And we had happened that I was in the 500-mile hiker club during that time. And so was she said. And I said, oh, no, I mean, later on, I said, you were, yes, we opened the yearbook and looked in, and there she was standing right in the group picture with the 500-mile hikers. But she was just a freshman and I was a senior. And so she went off to Tuscaloosa with her mother and graduated from Tuscaloosa High School, which is near Birmingham, Alabama. And it's in the heart of the Black Belt of Alabama, and a steel town, Birmingham, where an awful lot of, the University of Alabama is at Tuscaloosa, and they're a very famous and wonderful football team there. And Clemson, I think they call them. Right. Anyway, that's where she got her high school diploma, but she didn't pick up a Southern accent in that short of time. They only were there 3 years, and they came back. And the family that was living in there were just, again, they were Navy people from Great Lakes Naval Training Station, and they were just renting the house until Virginia returned with her daughter, who is now a high school graduate. So Marilyn went to school in Chicago at Norwegian American Hospital as a nursing student, just like her mother had done. But she was determined to finish. However, soon after she went down there, she was just a kid and she didn't like it. Something happened that didn't work out, and she quit. And she went to work at the telephone company in Chicago. And back in those days, you had to put plugs, electric plugs in, tied to rubber covered, and you were at a switchboard. And people, number please, they'd say. It was a live operator, and then you'd give the number orally, and then she would plug it you in. Well, that's what she did. She did that for a while. She decided she didn't like that, but she lived with some girls.
Sorry, was this in Waukegan or down in Tuscaloosa?
What happened?
No. This telephone operator, was this after she came back from Tuscaloosa?
Oh, yes. This is after she came back. And she was in Chicago doing this and lived in an apartment with some girls. And I guess, they had a real good time because it was kind of like a sorority house. They paid the rent and they were on their own. They didn't have any adult supervision. And she was only like 18 years old. So she finally decided she would go back to nurses training. And by then, she had become a Roman Catholic. Now, we were Roman Catholics, but we knew the Haltemans were not. In fact, CJ was a member of the Masons, which were kind of a religious social group that didn't usually take Catholics, or Catholics wouldn't join the Masons because it was a religious group.
Uh-huh.
And that was the only religious group that Pop ever belonged to, as far as I know,
Huh.
was the Masons. But we didn't think Marilyn was Catholic. But one day we saw her coming up the street in the wintertime, and she had a missal in her hand. Now, we could tell it was a missal, Catholic missal, because it had red on the edge of the paper, and you could see that it was a missal. And and my mother said, we saw her out the window. She's got a missal. She must be a Catholic, because Catholics had missals. You know, Protestants had Bibles, but missals were smaller, and so she could tell. Now, how did that happen? Well, Marilyn had this unhappy time of divorce and separation of her parents, and she wanted to have a wonderful family and not have divorce. And the Catholic Church did not allow divorce. And so both Marilyn and her brother, Conrad Joseph, became Catholic separately without even knowing the other one was in different churches, but they both became Catholics and both married Catholics. So the Haltemans kids were all raised very Catholic, and so were you kids raised Catholic,
Right.
because Marilyn and her brother married Catholics.
Well,
and were converted to the Catholic faith.
okay.
I
I think this is a good place to tie it off because Marilyn now has come back to Waukegan, or at least to Chicago anyway.
And it's about this time that I met her, really met her,
Right.
and got to know her. But okay, we'll do that on another one. But
So-
Marilyn was.
Were there any other clues? Did you follow up on the missile thing? Is that how you got to know Mom? Was through Catholicism?
Well, not really. We're all right. I got more interested in her, and so when I asked her for a date, I was aware then that she was a Catholic, and she then explained to me how that all happened. But and I suppose, I don't know, maybe I wouldn't have asked her for a date if she hadn't been a Catholic. Back in those days, my mother was worried that I would not marry
A Protestant.
somebody that wasn't Catholic. And so she was thinking that Marilyn would be, that'd be all. She approved of me dating Marilyn because she was a Catholic.
She had
right.
the missile.
That made everything very smooth.
Okay. Well, good.
Okay.
Good. Let's wrap it up there, and we'll
Okay.
continue on another day with more adventures.
Another chapter in Marilyn June Halteman's life.
Right.